Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what was going on. I'm gonna adjust it so it's not doing that. Well, I'll start over because we our guest won't be here for about 30 minutes. All right. So for those of you just joining and didn't hear anything I said, I'm Dr. Benjamin Daldaro. I am one of the world recognized experts on the topic of firearms in America. I've published about 21 articles, most of which look at health and well being with firearm ownership or the social determinants of gun ownership or gun policy support. What that latter part means is why do people own guns and why do they support the laws that they do? So we're going to be talking about everything that happened yesterday and some context leading up to that. Now, what I had started with, and I'll just go back through it, was some recent data on guns in America. Now, the most recent data we have is for 2023, so it's always a 2-year lag. We'll get 2024's in October, maybe, but it's usually about a 2-year lag. In 2023, we had just under 47,000 gun deaths in the United States, and 58% of those were suicide. 38% were homicide. The remaining were accidental death. Now, this was actually a decrease from previous years. The rate in 2023 was 13.7 per 100,000, and that was down from 14.6. So we were actually coming down, but in 2024 and this year, it looks like we're going back up. So we'll see. But when we were looking at those coming down, that was right after laws went into effect that prohibited domestic violence individuals from having firearms. Some states were tightening up laws. And so we had some things happening. Because the reality is that states with stricter laws have fewer gun homicides. When we look at like the best states, the safest states, Massachusetts is at the top, followed by New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Hawaii, and Connecticut. But on the opposite end of that is Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, New Mexico, and Alaska. Mississippi's rate is about 10 times the rate of Massachusetts, and Mississippi has no large cities. Mississippi's biggest city is Jackson, and I want to say they have a population of around 70,000 people. And so Mississippi's rate is 29.6 per 100,000. Compare that to Massachusetts, that has a rate of 3.7 per 100,000. The reason that those states differ so much, Massachusetts has some of the strictest laws in the country, and Mississippi has the weakest laws in the country. In Mississippi, there's almost nothing done to prevent a person from getting a gun. I can go and buy one from a private seller without a background check. There's very little in the way of waiting periods. I can buy a gun and sell it immediately after I walk outside. So there's not a lot to prevent people from having firearms there. Whereas in Massachusetts, there's a lot that goes on. And so even when we look at like places like Illinois, because right before Charlie Kirk died, he mentioned gang violence. He was about to talk about Chicago. Illinois is significantly safer than Texas or Florida. Okay, Illinois has a rate of 13.5 per 100,000. Florida is 13.7. Texas is 14.9. So those states with their everybody can carry policy are worse than Chicago. Um, in fact, the gun homicide rate in Jackson, Mississippi is about 4 times the rate of Chicago. Chicago has a rate of about 14.5 per 100,000. So, areas with stricter laws have lower gun deaths. Utah allows campus carry and teachers to carry and has a pretty liberal view of gun ownership, meaning everybody can have a gun. Okay, we use the words liberal and conservative wrong. Liberal means unregulated, and that's pretty much what they have. They allow anyone to have a gun. And what we saw then was a person with bad intentions use that gun and, hurt Charlie Kirk's and his people gathered. He, of course, did not make it. But at the same time that was going on, a high school student attacked other students at Evergreen High School in Denver, Colorado. And that didn't get anywhere near the news mention that we saw with Charlie Kirk. I'll point out that our president lowered the flags to half-mast for Charlie Kirk, did not do so for the 2 Democratic senators that were killed a few months ago, nor for pretty much any other school shooting. He did lower them for the most recent school shooting before Evergreen, but prior to that, not really. So Charlie Kirk is getting a lot more press related to mass shootings and pretty much anybody else gets. When my guest gets here, they're a survivor of gun violence. We're going to talk about how that affects you long term. Because while I do not have any sympathy or empathy for Charlie Kirk, I do really worry about his kids who were there. I worry about the students that saw it. Because that's a trauma that will carry with you. Okay? And while we're waiting, I'll talk about why I have no empathy for Kirk. On basically the 1-year anniversary for Uvalde, where 19 7-year-old kids were killed, Charlie Kirk was asked, "How do you feel about mass shootings in schools?" And his response is that quote that we've seen floating around the internet, where he says, "People dying is the cost of freedom." And that rhetoric is harmful. Not only is it harmful to causing what happened to Charlie Kirk, it is also harmful to survivors and to families that lose their kids. That they hear this and they're like, wow, this is like another trauma put on me. Okay? And that's just one thing that he did that makes it hard for me to empathize. He also made comments where he said that if he saw a person of color doing a job, he would question their qualifications, as if a black man can't be a pilot or a woman can't do a job. He had said that his 10-year-old daughter, if she were to get pregnant, he would force her to carry the baby. So all of those things combined makes it really hard for me to have empathy for that man. Okay? That being said, no one deserves to be a victim of gun violence. Okay? I am sad that we have more people gone because as a country, we don't want to do anything about it. Okay? And as I said, his very young children were there. They witnessed it. That's going to carry with them. Okay? And we'll talk about that in a minute when Morning gets here. The reality is, though, this is the world we live in. Because our politicians do not want to do anything to stop this. Okay? Marco Rubio, following Parkland, told a survivor of Parkland he would never stop taking money from the NRA. How problematic is that statement? How problematic is it for a politician to say that, hey, this lobbying group that is preventing kids from coming home to their families because they're fighting common sense regulation, I'm never going to stop taking their money, right? And the way that he said it to survivors of Parkland is also problematic. I want to welcome my guest, Morgan, if you want to turn your camera on if you can. Morgan, you are.
I cannot turn. I'm so sorry. I cannot turn my camera on.
That's fine. That's fine. But you are a survivor. Let's move forward real quick, because I was just talking about how Kirk's kids witnessed this, right? And the kind of trauma that experiencing something like this does. Why don't you take a minute and tell people your story?
Yeah, absolutely. On November 21st of 2021, I was driving down the Pennsylvania Turnpike when a driver cut me off, and I swerved to avoid hitting him, and I accidentally cut off another driver who then decided that they should, after passing me, slow down and shoot me through my car door. There is he had a dash cam, so there was dash cam footage of the incident, and I was able to describe what had happened, and the cops did arrest him. I was shot through my abdomen, and they had to remove 4 inches of my lower intestine, but other than that, physically, I got okay.
Tell everybody the kinds of traumas that come with just any form of gun violence, especially being a victim.
So there's going to be PTSD involved, right? And that involves a lot of hypervigilance. Anywhere I go, I not now, but in the beginning, at least for the first, year and a half, I was really aware of possible dangers of every person, and I was constantly looking to see if somebody looked like they might react in violence. I had flashbacks quite frequently. Loud noises would startle me and send me into complete panic attacks. And there's just like a sound inside your head that is very loud all the time. I don't know how else to explain it, but it just is never quiet for a very long time, and it's like a static sound. That might sound weird, but that's how I experienced it, and it can be very overwhelming.
And it makes it where it's hard to enjoy things in your normal life, right? Like, it's almost impossible to go out in public because you hear a car backfire or fireworks or a loud sound in a movie theater, and you're suddenly back in that space. Or you're in a restaurant and you can't stop watching everybody around you. Would you like to talk on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I still, to this day, experience on occasion if someone honks their horn aggressively, I can panic, or if I've gotten cut off in traffic before and I've had to pull over because of the panic that I got from that, because immediately your mind does go back to that moment and you wonder, does that person have a gun? They very well could. Are they going to decide that they should pull it today? And yeah, any loud noises, fireworks are a huge issue for me, which is complicated because my birthday is on July 4th, so I'd always loved them in the past. And, I kind of live out in the middle of nowhere. People set off fireworks for all sorts of occasions, or they're gunfire in my woods, and there's like really never true peace because there's always something going on. I can't even watch TV because even TV shows that are not supposed to be violent, there will be gun violence in them. Mm-hmm. Like TV dramas and stuff. So you're inundated with it all the time, and it triggers those flashbacks.
Yeah, and I want to point out some statistics. About 30% of all television shows have some form of violence in them, okay? So, think about even Disney cartoons, right? How traumatic are some of those? Like Bambi, Lion King, right? There's violence, we're inundated with it, right? And about a quarter of Americans have actually walked out of a movie because of the violence level.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize it was 30%.
Yeah, it's
I didn't
about
realize that was there's
it's
actual.
like 29.8%, something like that. Um, and it's everywhere, right? And most of it like might be comedic or cartoonish, but more and
Mhm.
more it's become like a CSI kind of violence, right? Where even in PG-13 movies, someone pulls a gun or another weapon, and you may not see it hurt the person, but you hear it go off, right? Um, and it's so common that we just ignore it.
No, it is. And one of the other side of it that I'm starting to realize now, I mean, it'll be 4 years this year since I was shot, and something that's come up for me in recent times is I also have PTSD and trauma associated with going to the hospital. And I received great care, but they'll very graphically show hospital scenes of someone being shot on shows quite frequently, and I find that that's now where my trauma is more focused, and it's something else that I have to work through. But that's another side of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's medical trauma too.
Yeah, and I can't imagine what it must be like to undergo surgeries to have part of your body removed because of damage done in something like that. Um, and a lot of these create lifetime injuries, right? You probably have lifetime things you're going to be dealing with because of that.
I'm fairly lucky. My understanding is that I shouldn't have future problems, but I find it hard to believe that a portion of my insides could be taken out, and that's not true. I mean, I do have scars that
Mm-hmm.
I see all the time because they had to. It was an emergency surgery, so they weren't really concerned about scar placement at the time, and the the seriousness of the injury was really in the months couple of months afterwards because it was my small intestine that was perforated. That is incredibly dangerous for infection. It's sepsis. So I came out of that all very lucky. I
Mm-hmm.
just where the bullet hit me was lucky. I was in my Jeep, which sits up higher. That I have a convertible from a few years ago that I paid off. It sits up higher than my car. If I had been in my car, I would not be here today
Mm-hmm.
because of the difference in height of where I would have been shot.
Yeah, and I'm grateful you're still with us, Morgan.
Thank you.
It's beyond even that. Would you like to talk about some of the harassment that you suffered?
I have had quite a bit of online harassment because of the shooting. I have had there was someone who put out who made a troll account who put pictures of my house with my street address on it, followed by pictures of the guy who shot me. They said that they were going to contact him and his family because I had clearly provoked him on purpose to shoot me because I was racist, which is, I mean, white people are racist inherently, but that's crazy. Like, nobody should get shot over a traffic inconvenience. That's impossible. Like, I didn't know what he looked like till I saw him holding a gun. So how would the whole thing is crazy. I had somebody sit on a live once for 16 hours and repeatedly tell people that I had gotten shot on purpose because it was my live stream to put a black man in jail. Doesn't even know me. She just did that for 16 hours once.
Mm-hmm.
And I have people come into my comment section all the time, or they have in the past, it's less now, saying that I deserve to be shot, that they wished I had died, that, the only good leftist is a dead one. Like, that happens all the time to me.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come back to those statements here in a second. I want to back up to a little bit about the harassment and tie it back to Charlie Kirk. I mentioned that it was in April of 2023, and Uvalde happened in May 20th of 2022. So about a year, right around the year anniversary, he was, asked about his feelings towards school shootings, and that's where he made that quote that's floating around the internet again about how that's the cost of freedom, right? And I have been in lives and things with survivors and parents who lost their kids, and people told them, your kid deserved to die so I could keep my gun, right? And that's a common rhetoric, okay? That they will say, well, I don't care if your kid died as long as I get to keep my gun, okay? And I know you've seen stuff like that too. but more than that is this idea, right, that violence is the answer. Okay. Now, I said earlier before you joined that while I will never grieve this man, he was a racist, a misogynist, um, you know, proponent for violence, for hate. I don't wish violence on him, right, or anyone like him. I'd rather them just disappear and go away. Um, as someone who has experienced it, what are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't have wished it to happen to him because of the people that would witness it and then what will come afterwards.
Right.
There will be a violent response to violence. There always is. I'm apathetic, because, he did say that he doesn't believe in empathy.
Right.
So he doesn't think empathy is real. So I don't feel like I should hold energy and empathy for him. I also, he did make those comments that people have to die so people can own guns. Well, he died for what he believed in. Now, do I think someone should have done what they did? No.
Exactly.
But I don't. It's really hard for me to give a lot of
my
energy into caring.
My empathy is for his children that were there because they can't control who their parents are, right? And all those college students and faculty and whatever that had to witness it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have much empathy for his wife. A little bit, but not much, because she knows who he is and chooses it. And I have no empathy for him at all. He has said some really horrible things. You mentioned his comment on empathy, where he said, "I don't believe in empathy. I think it's a new age term, and it's destructive." Right? Empathy is woke, and that is telling of anyone. Right? And he made that comment basically in response to people talking about how Jesus is empathetic. And he was trying to say, no, Jesus isn't. Empathy is woke. Right? And that's a mindset I can't wrap my head around.
Me neither. A lot of people are saying, right, like on the internet, they're saying, but he was a good Christian man. No, he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because Jesus did, in fact, teach about empathy. He fed the poor. He cared about the sick. He said to take care of the least among you. I mean, I'm not religious, but I went to church for a very long time as a young person. I read the Bible. I know these things are true. And if you say that empathy isn't real, then you are not following the teachings of Jesus. Therefore, you are not a good Christian man.
No. A lot of people who claim they're Christian really aren't. They just like the label. And they like the hate, hellfire, and brimstone form of Christianity, which doesn't actually follow Christ's teachings, right? Jesus told a parable where he said, I'll just paraphrase it and sum it down, that you should pay a person who works half a day a full wage, just like the person who worked a full day, right? That's pretty woke. That's a pretty socialist attitude, right? He said we should feed and clothe people and house people, right? He said we should offer health care to people. He said we should welcome the immigrant, right? He said you should pay your taxes. Those are all very woke sentiments, right? Maybe not in the same way that we would view progressive today, right? But they were pretty progressive for that time period. And a lot of the modern Christian nationalist movement doesn't want to hear any of those things. They don't want to hear that Jesus said, love everybody. That he said, let the immigrant in. The Bible mentions allowing the immigrant in more than it says pretty much any other sentiment, right? Welcome the stranger. It starts in Leviticus and Judges. Welcome the stranger, for you will want strangers in Egypt, right? And then Jesus says it in Matthew, Luke, and John. Okay? They hold on to one verse. Okay? Luke 22:38, where after telling them to buy a sword, they say they do. And they use that as their excuse for gun ownership. But that's antithetical to that message. How do we reach those people, Morgan?
No, that's such a great question. I'm not really sure that I have the answer for, because the only way that they're ever going to, I'm not advocating for anything to happen to them or their families, but the only way they're ever going to understand the harm they're causing is for it to happen to somebody that they care about. I mean, even like, I was shot by somebody who had a gun. He never should have owned one. He did not have a permit to carry in the state of Pennsylvania, but he bought his gun in the state of Ohio. And he was because we don't have federal like gun regulations across the board, he was able to keep that gun and bring it into Pennsylvania. So I have family members who are, mad at me for saying I don't have empathy for a man who said that if I had died, I was a sacrifice that had to happen. I didn't consent to that. And even though they are my family, they're mad at me for saying that. And so I don't actually, I think they have to see it up close and personal, unfortunately, and hope that changes their heart.
I mean, I don't disagree. For me, the turning point was Newtown, okay? Sandy Hook in 2012. December of 2012, I'll never forget. Up until that point, I probably owned 16 rifles, many of them assault-style rifles, right? 4 handguns. I had a lot of weapons. And I don't believe in protection, never have, but I like to go to the range. And for me, it was a hobby. They were toys, very deadly toys, but toys. And when Sandy Hook happened, and America said, hey, we don't care if little kids die, that was it for me. That was a turning point. Before that, I was pretty nonchalant. I would make pretty, glib comments. I would say things that Southerners say, right? Like, you trespass, I don't call the cops. That kind of bullshit. And Sandy Hook happened, and suddenly I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? And that was a change, okay? But it took something like that for me to wake up, right? There had been mass shootings before Sandy Hook. There was Columbine, right? There was Virginia Tech. And I just kind of shrugged my shoulders, right? I was like, it can't happen here. But then it happened at Sandy Hook, and suddenly I was like, whoa. Okay. But for a lot of people, unless it happens in their town to their kids, they don't care.
Nope.
Right?
They don't. They really don't.
They're just like, it can't happen here. But today, we all know at least one person who has experienced some form of gun violence. Right? If it's not us ourselves, it's somebody we're close to. And many of us know more than one. And some of the people who experienced a mass shooting, we're seeing this with Parkland and Sandy Hook, they go off to college and they experience another one or a third one. When does it end?
I don't know that it will end in our lifetime. I think that what we're going to see is a lot more people with guns at our schools, not like armed people that are supposed to be protecting the school before we ever see them do anything about gun violence, which will inevitably end up with more gun violence.
Right, and we have research on that. So a study was published in 2023 that found for every guard in a school, there is an increase in the odds of a child being hurt by 2.8. Okay, that means 3 kids for every guard. So if there's 2 guards, there's 6, right? Rounding up. That's bad. And we can see that with Uvalde, right? There were 376 officers at Uvalde, and they could not stop a single shooter.
They didn't want to go in, right?
Right, because they were afraid.
They didn't want to risk their life.
Yeah, and that's what we found is that they were so afraid of getting clapped that they said, "Nah, I can't do it." And they wouldn't go in because they were afraid of the AR-15. Now, I've never really been a proponent for bans, even though the semi-automatic weapons ban did work, right? There was definitely a decrease while it was in effect. I think we can solve a lot of our problems without going that far, but at the same time, I'm kind of ambivalent to it. And as more and more of these things happen, I'm kind of becoming more and more in favor. Maybe we should just get rid of the damn things, right? Especially since no one wants to solve the problem. Before we start talking about bans, what kinds of interventions do you think we can put in place that may reduce some of these?
Oh, I have a list.
Go
So
for it.
my list, there's a barrier of entry, including price. So it's something that would have to be funded by the government at the end of the day. But I think that people who carry guns should be required to carry insurance. Number one, for every firearm that they own. I believe that before you can buy a gun, you should be licensed. And I think there should be, I don't know what timeline is best, but like a minimum of a 6-week course about guns, gun violence, gun safety, so that training, like people shouldn't be handed a deadly weapon whenever they want. And so with that comes a cost. And I think our government should pay that cost, or at least a large portion of it.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned training. I'm going to just cover up the number, right? I have a concealed carry, okay? In the state of Florida, to get a concealed carry, you watch 4 hours worth of videos and then take a 20-question multiple choice test and then fire a single round through a gun. And that's it. That is the full extent of your training. No, I agree. Totally not good enough, right? A person who has gone through that cannot stop a threat. Okay? And that's part of why, like, and the research bears it out, but I believe this even before I saw the research. I don't believe that the average person can defend themselves with one. If you want to believe that, as long as you jump through whatever hoops are there, I don't care. But I don't believe it. And the research backs it out that people can't. Okay? Most of these things are stopped. If they're actually stopped by somebody, it's a law enforcement agent or an off-duty law enforcement military. Okay? It's not Jim Mob and the Gravy Seal. Okay? It's somebody with training, right? So I just don't buy it. In fact, a lot of times when it is just an average person, they stop it with anything but a gun, right? The yoga studio here in Tallahassee was stopped with a broom. Okay, they've been stopped with chairs and cell phones and other things that distract or incapacitate the shooter, right? But in most cases, right, vast majority, the person stops it themselves. At Evergreen High School, the shooter shot himself, right? And that's how most of them end. That's how Virginia Tech ended. That's how the vast majority of these end. They're not arrested. Some of them escape, but the vast majority commit suicide. Okay. My list, and I don't disagree with anything you said, right? I would say insurance is a must, right? We pay insurance on everything else. Why not this? Okay. I also believe in safe gun storage. I think you should have them locked up. I also believe guns and ammunition should be a separate safe, not in the same safe. I think there should be better background checks. I think every sale should have a background check. Okay? I don't care if it's me selling to my neighbor. There needs to be a background check, right? In the comments we have, maybe the president should cut the harmful rhetoric that he constantly spews. Dehumanizing others does not help. 100% agree, right? Like, if you look right now on conservative Twitter and things, they are demonizing the left, blaming them, even though no one's been arrested for this. And overwhelmingly, mass shootings and things and political violence are done by the right-wing instigators. But I will say, the last time we had major reform, a Republican did it, okay? And that was Ronald Reagan. And it was in the wake of an assassination attempt on himself where James Brady was paralyzed. That led to the Brady Bill and the semi-automatic weapons ban. Could Charlie Kirk's death be an impetus to that?
I, I wish it would, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. don't think that. I mean, Trump is literally calling for political violence against anyone who disagrees with him by calling them the radical left, right?
Right.
So he doesn't care about doing anything about automatic. I know that the statistics show that when semi-automatic rifles or automatic weapons were banned for a time, that they decreased gun violence, but then they removed that ban, and I don't know if they'll be able to put it back in. I just don't know.
Yeah. So, like, if we look at the years leading up to the ban, there was an average of 7.2 deaths per year related to mass shootings. While the ban was in place, and this includes Columbine, Columbine happened while the ban was in place, it was 5.4. And now that it has been removed, it's up to like 48.
Oh my God.
Right? So, the ban being in place absolutely helped. Right? But when the ban went into place, there were very few people with those kinds of weapons. Now, I think that genie's out of the bottle. I don't know that we can put that back in, right? That's why I prefer some of the more reasonable things like the gun storage, insurance, training. Training is a must. But, you know, to kind of push back on whether or not something will change, when it's just poor kids, right, or rural kids who are suffering from this, right, even if they're in affluent neighborhoods like Parkland or Sandy Hook, and it's not, you know, the people spewing this rhetoric, they don't care. But now that it's happened to one of their own, might that make a difference? Ben Shapiro canceled his appearances.
I heard that.
Right? He canceled all of his appearances following this. And I expect others to do the same. Might they be like, oh shit, we might need to get something under control now that, you know, the people we're demonizing have turned on us. And I don't know. Like, statistically, it's probably conservative, but let's say it was a leftist that did this, right? Statistically, it was probably a conservative because more and more, that's who does these things, right? But let's say it was a leftist. How long can you have hate rhetoric demonizing minorities, women, trans individuals, LGBTQ individuals before they push back, right? Might that be the scare that is needed to make change?
I do believe the reason why we're seeing a lot of right now the violent rhetoric from people on the right on like social media and stuff towards leftists that are, you know, they're saying it's your time now, we're coming for all that stuff, is because they're scared, because it's happening to somebody like them as a consequence. And we don't know why yet because they haven't called the guy, but you know, my original thought was I wouldn't be surprised if this was a trans person who was kicked out of the military without any of their benefits, who had nothing left. That was my first thought. I hope it's not, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I don't think that's the path that we're on now, but
see, I don't think so. I think it was a white man. Okay.
Yeah, they have a picture of him now.
Yeah, I haven't seen the picture yet, but I think it was a white man, and I believe it's somebody that lost somebody to gun violence. That's what I would guess, right? I don't think it's politically motivated at all. I think that there's somebody who lost somebody to gun violence, and they blamed Kirk and people like him for this happening, right? But we don't know. We won't know until they get, you know, arrested, right? Because prior to the pandemic, political affiliation was not a predictor for this at all, right? It was almost an equal number of Democrats as Republicans and independents that did these events. But since the pandemic, it's become more and more right-wingers, right? So that would be my guess. But, you know, going back to what I said, let's say it was someone on the left, right? People like Kirk have demonized the trans community in particular. He called for trans genocide, right? Mm-hmm. Is this reaping what he sowed?
I mean, yes. I think that words do have consequences. I don't think he should have been shot, but the things that he says and the hate that he spewed, ultimately, whether it is, I mean, they did release pictures of the guy, so it doesn't appear to be a trans person. We don't know anything about him yet, but who can really say? It just seems like, I don't know, he did. My answer is yes. I don't need to justify it. It's just that he did, in fact, reap what he said, because he got the consequences of his own words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the chat says that this is kind of selective outrage, and I agree. And we expected that, right? No one's talking about Evergreen High School. They're all talking about Charlie Kirk. Yeah, I said at the beginning, I don't think anyone should experience gun violence. I'll say that again. But at the same time, if you push a platform of hate, of division, of othering, and something bad happens to you, that is things you brought on yourself, right? That is something he caused it to happen, by, saying that trans people shouldn't exist, right? For instance, saying that people deserve to die for the Second Amendment. He promoted violence. We cannot be surprised when karma knocks on the door.
I agree. I don't know if he just didn't think that chickens would ever come home to roost. I don't know if he didn't think that he would be the sacrifice that he believed existed.
Yeah, I will 100% say he did not think it would ever happen to him, right? I don't think he ever believed it would happen to him.
No, probably not.
I mean, most of them don't, right? They spew this kind of stuff, and they just expect that, nothing bad will happen, right? That they'll profit and move on. I want to go back, though, to the idea of Schrodinger's liberal, okay? Because you see people on the right say, oh, Democrats are weak, and, at the same time, Democrats are dangerous. Which is it?
That happens all the time. They also say that we are angry and we want violence, while at the same time, like I saw a comment, someone was like, oh, you leftists are all violent, you just want violent, you pussy ass bitch. I'm sorry, is that not violence to you, what you just said? That person, the names that you called them is also, you're implying violence when you indicate that someone's a pussy, right? So it doesn't really make any sense.
No. Well, and somebody said that Kirk was very happy to let things happen to other people, right? He didn't think it would happen to him, but he didn't care if it happened to anybody else. I think that's true. And because we saw that in that podcast or whatever, where he said, following Uvalde, right? But yeah, like, if you think that this rhetoric that the right uses to demonize the left as being violent, do you think they really believe it, though? Or they just like saying the rhetoric?
I think that they are angry and they want to fight, and they don't really, someone has given them a target. No, I don't think they believe it. But I think that the Trump regime has demonized anybody who they've decided on the left, whatever definition they're going with at that time. They give them a target for all of their problems.
Yeah.
And
I agree with that. But I mean,
happens.
Let's be realistic for a second, right? Let's think about like the Hillary Clinton hit squads, right? If you really believed that this woman could make you disappear without consequence or repercussion, would you really go on the internet and start saying horrible shit about them?
Well, maybe, because I believe that Donald Trump is probably going to try to make me disappear someday. And until that happens, I'm going to keep.
But to our knowledge, like, we don't know what he's done, but to our knowledge, right, he hasn't done that, right? To our knowledge, he's not doing that. No one on the left is making the claims that Donald Trump is making people disappear, right? I don't believe overall he's doing that. Um, but if I had credible belief, I don't know that I would say some of the things that I say publicly.
Mm.
Because I would be worried about my kids or other people I cared about more so than me. Right? Because if you think about the way they talk about Hillary Clinton, she can make anyone vanish.
I'm not sure you would think they would be worried about being banished themselves.
Right.
I mean, there's a thing that happened earlier this year with one of the large protests that happened, the biggest one in April, was that there were a bunch of incidences of, first of all, we were being threatened on the internet all the time that they were going to show up and shoot us at protests. But there were a bunch of incidents that occurred with the violence coming from Republicans or Trumpers, or more specifically, where they did show up with weapons. But in every one of those instances, they looked quite terrified of the people around them. And none of those people appeared to be carrying a weapon. There's one incident where I think...
Yeah, like, if we look at, like, the Black Lives
Someone
Matter...
tried to call me, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We look at, like, the Black Lives Matters protests or, anything like that. Almost all the rioting, looting, and violence was done by, like, the Boogaloo Boys and groups like that.
Right.
But I go to a lot of protests. At no point have I ever been afraid of being a victim of violence, right? No matter how much they threaten and talk on Twitter or whatever, I've never been actually concerned, okay? But maybe I would do something different if I actually thought that that they were. No, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
There are people who are targeted, right? I'm saying I'm
Yeah.
just talking about the vast majority of protests, right? If I go to the protests here in Tallahassee, the military's not here, right? The National
Right.
Guard is
Right.
not here, okay? So we are not going to be subjected, right? DC is a different beast. Chicago is about to be a different beast. That's completely different. I'm talking about general protests, okay?
Most of the protests that have been occurring in this year have been incredibly safe. Not just
Yes.
from outside agitators, but also from police, and that's by and large it's a lot of white people, but they have been relatively safe.
Right. And that's all protests going back to, like I said, even if we look at 2016, 2020, any of the Black Lives Matter protests around the country, overwhelmingly safe, right? I think it was like 97% safe,
Yeah.
right? Yes, and the Supreme Court does keep chipping away at things, and things could change, right? I was honestly surprised that they didn't take away the boyfriend loophole law that was passed. For those that don't know, in many states, including here in Florida, if you are under a domestic violence restraining order, as long as you did not live with your partner, you did not have to surrender your gun. That was called the boyfriend loophole. Okay, Joe Biden ended that, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually upheld it, and I was surprised.
Yeah, me too.
Because as Mandy's pointing out, they have been chipping away at rights, and I do expect rights related to marriage equality to be under attack and gone under this court, right? But that's a different conversation to the guns. And yes, the Supreme Court just ruled in LA it is legal to racially profile, and that's going to lead to more violence in those places. That's why I said Chicago is probably going to be dangerous here very soon. Okay, DC, same. LA, same. Right? Atlanta, Georgia, probably not right now. Okay, I've been to Atlanta many times to protest. I've been to Nashville, Miami, never worried in those places. Might be a little concerned in DC today, right? Or LA today, or Chicago tomorrow. Just because of Trump and his threats with the National Guard and recent Supreme Court decision. But that leads us to a conversation with guns at protests, right? States like Texas allow you to open carry. But we had a situation where a person tried to kill protesters, right? Because he got scared that a person was open carrying. And he ended up killing a young man who was there with his wife.
Right.
Right? You know, are we going to see more things like that?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more violence towards protests in general. I think we're going to see lone wolves, people showing up who have a bone to pick with people on the left who've decided this is their moment to shine. I think we are going to see more of that, genuinely. Especially after Charlie Kirk, I think there's going to be a level of retaliation that happens, and I think that means that more people who are going to protest are going to carry to protect themselves. And it's ultimately just going to lead to more violence.
And then it becomes, what state are you in, right? Over whether or not you're, you or the person that's the aggressor is considered the good guy, right?
Right.
Because in Texas, the young man carrying was former military, upstanding young man, loved the community, no criminal record. The person who killed him had a criminal history, was kicked out of the military from violence, right? And Greg Abbott pardoned him. Okay? Because he killed somebody at a Black Lives Matter protest.
Wow. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah. And, we interviewed his mom on the radio about a year ago. Sheila. And he was there with his wife, and they were at the Black Lives Matter protest. He always carried his weapon just to, keep his wife safe. And this guy said he saw him with the weapon and got scared, so he hit him with his car. Right.
Oh, that was okay. I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. And there are lots of stories like that, right? But if we want to get into intersectionality, right? We can look at, the young man in, I want to say it was Indiana at the Blues Club. I want to say his name was Jerome. I'm blanking off the top of my head right now. He was a bouncer. A mass shooting started to happen. He stopped the mass shooter, right? You would think the NRA would jump on board with that and be like, see, good guy with a gun. Police showed up and killed him because he was a black man. Right? They just saw a black man with a gun. It has long been argued that gun rights only apply to white men. Right? That even when the right screams everybody should be armed, they really don't mean everybody. Right?
They definitely don't, because they were calling for trans people to lose gun rights just recently.
Yeah.
So they definitely don't believe that everyone should be armed.
Right. Yeah. And, Trump was. Trump was calling for that. And Trump continues to call for violence, right? So it's going to continue to escalate. I've said already, I don't think we can ever stop this until Trump is out of office and those like him are no longer in power. But, the NRA came out and said, no, we don't support it. And I made a video to point out that they didn't say that because they want trans people to have guns. They said that because there is a president in office with a history of just willy-nilly restricting gun rights, and they're afraid he might come for them next.
Right.
Right? They are afraid that, he may take away something else. Because you got to remember, he banned bump stocks, which I think need to be banned, right? I agree with that. After Las Vegas, but they fought it to the Supreme Court to get that overturned. They don't want to go through that again. Following Parkland, he said, let's ban guns from anyone dangerous and take them away from them without due process, right? And so when he started saying banning trans people from having guns, the NRA's like, whoa, 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 how far removed is that from saying Jim Bob down the street can't have a gun? Right? It was never about protecting trans rights. It was fear that they might come for their rights next. And I will say this, the NRA will tokenize the hell out of any individual of a marginalized status just for that purpose, right? But at the end of the day, they'll discard them when they're no longer useful.
Right.
Where do we go from here, Morgan?
I have a question for you that you may have talked about earlier, but how do you address the idea of people who say we have a mental health problem in this country? Because we do, but that's outside the realms of just gun violence, like in general. So like, how do you explain to people why gun reform is necessary along with mental health treatment?
That's a great question. Let's talk about it. First of all, when we blame mental health, we are scapegoating the real issue, right? Which is access, right? If we just look at the facts, and I will say this with the caveat that I believe anyone who commits one of these acts is mentally ill, right? I firmly believe that. Only 25% of mass shooters have a diagnosis at the time of the attack. Okay? A quarter. Not even a quarter. It's a little bit less, right? And on top of that, Donald Trump in May cut $11 billion to mental health services and addiction services from Health and Human Services. Following Santa Fe, before Uvalde, Greg Abbott cut like $2 billion from mental health services. Ronald Reagan, upon becoming president of the United States, cut national funding to mental health. If we were really concerned that it's a mental health problem and not a gun problem, why do we keep cutting funding? Right?
Right. Well, and they also, one of the cuts that they made to the Department of Education was there was a department specifically in regards to researching and trying to solve the problem of gun violence and mental health in schools. So I tell people all the time they cut funding to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other big issue, right? And I use this movie even though it's dated and most of my students don't know it, haven't seen it, but there's a movie that was starred Tom Cruise that came out in the early 2000s called The Minority Report. And the premise of that movie is that these psychics can predict who's going to commit crime, and they arrest them before they commit the crime. And at some point, Tom Cruise, who is the lead investigator, has a minority report come up on him, and the whole movie's about him trying to prove he's innocent and not going to commit this crime, right? But I call this whole thing with mental health the minority report effect, in that we think doctors, psychologists, and psychiatrists can predict which person is going to be violent and which one is not, right? Which leads to a couple of problems. First, that because that's not humanly possible, right, then why even have laws? Because guns then are being used by lone deranged lunatics. Hold on one second. My dog got like crazy. If guns are being used by lone deranged lunatics, you can't predict that, right? And you can't stop it. Okay? It also means though that if a psychiatrist or psychologist can't predict it, then they're not good at their job, and why have it? Right? We shouldn't even bother with it because they're not good at doing this thing. So the way we demonize mental health is problematic in those ways. And it's also problematic in that the most common mental health diagnosis is depression followed by anxiety, right? And people with depression and anxiety don't often commit dangerous acts. Okay? So, how then do we move forward? Well, first, research, right? We should fund mental health services, but we need to fix the access problem, right? If we reduce how people can get guns, then we can worry about also working on people's mental health. And yeah, well, you want to take some final thoughts and we'll wrap up?
You want my final thoughts?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, first of all, I do agree we need to fund mental health treatment, and that's usually my answer to people is we should fund mental health treatment. And access is the problem, so I think people should have to have classes before they can buy a gun, which also includes like individual sales. That's a whole mess, like the gun show loophole that still exists. That's a whole mess that should be dealt with. And I hope that there are people who saw what happened to Charlie Kirk who go, enough is enough. Because at some point, I have to believe that enough people will say enough is enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for my final thoughts, nothing is going to change if we just rely on politicians to do it. They have no reason to change it on either side. While Republicans are the ones most funded by the NRA, Democrats get money from them too, right? Either we need to vote all those people out, or we need grassroots initiatives that force change, right? We can't just get involved when it happens to us personally. We need to get involved today so it doesn't happen to anyone else, okay? No one, no matter how much you disagree with them, deserves to be a victim of gun violence, okay? And the politicization of something like kids dying has created so many problems in this country, right? Yes, there's a mental health issue, right? That's a different can of worms. We need to fund it, okay? But more importantly, there's an access to guns problem, okay? If I can buy a gun and step outside on the sidewalk and immediately sell that gun to anyone else, okay, without a background check, that is a problem, okay? That is a problem. I don't know if you can see the comments, Morgan, but
No.
Mandy is thanking you for your story.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank y'all for listening. I appreciate it.
At the end of the day, we need to do better, and we need to fix this problem, right? I didn't get involved until Sandy Hook, and I kick myself every day that I was not involved before that, right? I know so many people who lost kids or family members and wish they got involved before that, right? We all need to get involved. I am tired of kids dying. I'm tired of innocent people dying, right? I'm tired of it. And again, while I have no empathy at all for Kirk, he brought that on himself. I don't want my political rivals to be killed in gun violence, right? I would rather defeat their ideas and throw them in the wasteland and forget about them. But that's not realistic in the world we live in. So that's where we'll stop. And Morgan, I thank you for coming on with me. I appreciate you. And we're going to end here. Thank you everybody for joining. Hope you enjoyed. I'm going to try and go regular live more often as I can. But yeah, that's where we're going to stop. Have any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you so much for having me today. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, we're going to end this stream.